Welcome to Inspiring Possible. I'm Christy Pennison, former stuck person turned therapist and dream consultant. Are you feeling stuck, overwhelmed, uncertain, or just need a little inspiration? Then I want to help you gain the clarity, confidence, and courage to create possibilities and live a life you love. Because folks, life's too short to be miserable. Hey, Inspiring Possible listeners. It is so good to be back with you today. And really, I'm excited because I just came off of this really amazing trip and I'm re-energized about all of these things that I want to do in my life. So that might be a shameless plug. If you haven't taken a trip where you can get around inspiring people or people doing that incredible things, go find you a space to go hang out with some people that can just re-energize you, inspire you, encourage you, empower you, because that has really been a game changer in my life. And it helps you kind of move on to the next version of what's possible for you. But on that thread, there is somebody that, we've met online and we've kind of been around each other in the same spaces and have started similar things around the same timetables that I really wanted to have on the show. And we wanted to do this over a year ago when we both started our podcast. We said, we're going to do this, but it's taken us a year to actually make this a reality. So I want to also say that before I introduce her, to let you know that no matter where you are along the journey, just because something doesn't happen right away doesn't mean that you can't always circle back. And it doesn't always mean that maybe a better timing is going to be a little bit down the road. So just throwing that out there too. So get around some cool people, always invite them back in case you don't always get connected when you want. You can always revisit those relationships and those collaborationships. And so I'm really excited to have Julia Nepini on the show today. And she is actually a clinical forensic social worker who also owns a therapy practice similar to ours. They're a little bit different. But we are really excited. I'm excited to have her on today because before we push the record button, she's all about kind of creating a value-aligned life, business, practice with integrity. And so I'm like, ooh, let's talk about that. So welcome, Julia.
Thanks for having me, Christy. I am pumped. It's about time.
I know. Well, congratulations to you because you have the Compassionate Calm podcast that has recently made a year. Maybe talk about why that was a passion of yours to start that.
Absolutely. And the same congratulations goes to you. Consistency. And this is a labor of love for sure.
And it's because we love you, listeners. We just want to make sure that you get some content that can help you reconceptualize your life, your business, a business that you want to do, a thing in your life you want to do. So what was kind of the motivating factor for you to be like, I want to start a podcast?
I was struggling to find my people. I was in the business world and I was really nurturing that entrepreneurial spirit that I had. And I was struggling to find other people that operated within the same value system that I did, specifically operating from a place of integrity, using that moral compass as a guide, but then also being compassionate and empathetic and not losing sight of that when success sets in.
Yeah.
So my hope was that if I created this platform and I opened it up, that I would have people that were interested in coming on the show and we could have conversations about that value system and how they weave that into their businesses. And that's exactly what's happened. So,
well, that might be a good point to start in the story because I really do think this is something that anybody along the journey can lose sight of. And it doesn't even have to be that you're wanting to start a business. It could be in your career path. It could be in your familiar relationships, like the relationships within your family, or it can be within your, romantic relationship, or, in all different kind of areas of our life. I think sometimes we can lose the why behind what we started to begin with. And you're right, finding those people that align with your values and integrity and the way that you want to do things. So why is this so important to you to have maybe you can talk a little bit about your story about why this is important for you to have a compassionate, approach to things, why values are so important and how you have tried to stay true and aligned with the things that you're doing in your life.
Because my value system is really what sets me apart. And when I was working for other people before starting my own business, I never really felt recognized for what I brought to the table, the work I was doing, my contributions, and especially working at a hospital or working for community mental health. There's this hierarchy that we're working within. And there's a lot more that goes on behind the scenes, like in any business, that we're not always privy to, especially if we're an employee and not in a leadership role. But it was really hard to be on the front lines doing the work and not necessarily having a lot of that information of what was happening and getting a lot of that support and guidance and transparency and being asked to do more and more and more and not being compensated for that and not being recognized for the things that you are doing that are really helping that business and those clients and those patients. And so I just made it my vow that when I finally decided to start my own business, that I was going to do it different. And that when I was going to build my team, that I was going to create the kind of place that I wanted to work at, and that I was having a hard time finding out there, and that I wanted to draw people in that were on that same wavelength.
Yeah. So, and it's so interesting because I'll be honest with you. Sometimes people are like, well, when I am trying to make a change or I want to go through for this thing in my life, where do I start? I really do think that sometimes you can start with like, what were the experiences or things that you didn't like? Speaking about that weekend, I know me and you were chatting about it briefly before we pushed the record button, but like I met so many different people this past weekend. It was women. It was this thing called Remarkable Women where local communities nominated women within their community that they thought were doing remarkable things. And then you had a winner for each of those areas. And then they sent all those winners to Los Angeles for this incredible 2-day event. But one of the things that kept on, I guess, resonating with me that I kept on hearing when I'd hear some of those stories of these amazing like nonprofits or organizations that these people had created, a lot of it was created out of some type of pain that they either went through or something that they saw was a gap, an injustice, an issue that needed to be solved. And they decided to stand in that gap. So, what I'm hearing you say is that part of the reason that led you ultimately to saying, you know what, I want to create something different. I want to create a business that is different than the experience that I had in the workplace. You started with what were the things that I didn't like? And then what are the things that I value and that I wanted to also create in a space?
Yeah, exactly. And then I just took it and ran with it from there and was able to find more people that shared that value system. And that's like the foundational steps in starting a business. And did I have that day one when I opened the doors? No. But as I started bringing more people on and I was spending more time thinking about it and reflecting back on those experiences and new situations happened, I came back to these 5 core values that are incorporated in every aspect of my life. So it's integrity, it's compassion, it's authenticity, being able to show up as your true self, collaboration. I'm drawing a blank on the 5th one, but
I know. They sound very similar to mine. I mean, because I'm telling you, the foundation of even, the therapy practice I have, it's compassionate care, which also includes empathy. It's authenticity. It's collaboration and connection. And now I'm drawing the blank on the other one. Do we say authenticity, compassion? I don't know. Anyways, it's all good things. Okay. It's going to come to my mind as soon as we probably move on from this topic. But I actually was in a group call recently with some other people that have different types of businesses. And we were talking about why are values important anyways? That was the question that was brought to the table. Like, why is it important that you have values? Not only maybe for if you have an organization that you're either part of or that you manage, but also why is it important to have clear values for your personal life? What would you say to that, Julia?
well, I think that your work life is a byproduct, or your personal life is a byproduct of your business, right? So we're all going to have a way that we earn income in the world. And I think that for me, those needed to be congruent with one another because I couldn't show up every day in my work life and then be at home and have that inconsistency. It just didn't sit right with me. A lot of this comes back to the Enneagram for me. I'm just so clear that As an Enneagram 1, I'm like the perfectionist reformer.
Okay, you're a 1.
Wait, are you too?
I know I'm a 7, but I always navigate towards 1s. Like all of the important people in my life are 1s.
Yeah. So for me, it is all about there are rules, there is structure, and there are these expectations that we have for ourselves and for other people. And so that awareness that really drives me. My motivation is to do right and improve and make things better. So I feel like for me, that's where it all comes from.
Well, and this concept, I remember when I was having this conversation with somebody that I thought it's really good, is that not only to be clear, like you said, on like values, if you are starting a business or whatever, it is also getting clear on what your personal values are. Because I do think when you don't know what your values are and you're not aware of them, then you might actually take on somebody else's or be swayed by somebody else's values. And that may not be important to you. What they're valuing may not be a super value to you. And we can sometimes take on other people's if we're not clear on what it is and why is that important to us. And I do think our values can shape. I mean, they can change a little bit in life based off of what the priority is. But I think there's some things that are just to you, like thinking about you, Julia, like I'm sure you chose your values, or at least it sounds like it, based off of what's important to you.
But I also think it has so much to do with we're all looking for purpose and meaning. And I think we're all here with a purpose, and it's our responsibility to figure out what that is. We all have unique gifts and skills. And for me, it's about being able to share that with as many people as possible and that ripple effect. And so, yeah, I feel like that's where I'm at right now. I tapped into that and I realized that there was so much more opportunity to do that when I didn't have that glass ceiling, working in a hierarchy. I could be in a leadership position. I could manage people. Not to say that it's easy, not to say that it doesn't bring up your own stuff and challenge you on the regular, but I was open to it.
Yeah. Well, and I can think about, and I've shared this story before on this podcast, but I never realized how important it was to have what I call value alignment. So, like we're talking about, like that your values align with either the important people in your life or the type of workspace you're in. Until I was in a workspace, sounds very similar to you, where my values and the values of this place that I was showing up to every day, giving, a minimum of 8 hours of my day, sometimes it turned into 10 for 5 days a week, was not the same. They did not have the same values.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that that's not a bad thing. It just means it created so much stress, so much, internal. I'm like touching my chest because I'm like, it created so much internal conflict within my life because it was such a misalignment that I kept on trying to interject my values and stay true to my values, but that was not the predominant culture's values. So
right.
I don't know if it sounded like you kind of had this similar experience.
Oh, for sure. And then we add in being parents and especially us raising daughters. And, when you are in a position where people are looking to you for how you handle things. And obviously we put ourselves in positions where we now have people that we're responsible for. So that starts with like self-responsibility. And are we upholding, like my definition of respect is I would never ask someone to do something that I myself would not jump in and do.
Same. If I'm going to ask you to do it, I've either done it before. I might not have done it in a while, but I promise you, I've done it before. And I'm not going to ask you to do something that I wouldn't be willing to do myself.
Right.
But I just need help. So I need other people to do these things. But
yeah, we don't want to get too far away from the front lines to forget what that was like. And that's why I'm so open to interns and new grads. And I feel like that keeps me grounded in why I'm doing this at all.
Yeah. What do you think you've learned about yourself in the pursuit of your dreams and goals? Like, what do you think that you've learned as you've created all of these things in your life, from a podcast to consulting company to a group therapy counseling practice? What are the things that you feel like you've learned about yourself along the way that if you could go back to when you were starting, that you'd want to let yourself know, or just some things that maybe you have learned this is something that I really wish I would have known and really have valued, making sure to have this in my life.
I've been fortunate that I knew what I wanted to do very early on, never questioned that, never looked back, and just continued to grow and evolve. But I will say that along that journey and the progression, there have definitely been traits within me that I am so much more aware of now, hyper aware,
Yeah.
that I had to make a choice. Am I going to continue to make decisions and conduct myself in a way that is going to ramp that stuff up, or am I going to change my approach to it? So this brings up the people pleasing tendencies that we have, or the doing things out of obligation versus because you truly want to, or it's going to benefit you in some way. Empathy, but almost to an extreme where you're putting others over self. And so those are the things that I am so clear on now, that my daughter, for example, that I'm teaching her or pointing things out to her. She's so far beyond where I was at her age. And I have a lot more confidence that she'll be able to navigate a lot of this more effectively, but caring less about what other people think. Not saying that you're not going to care at all, but you want to evaluate the source. How much weight do you want to give that person? How much are you going to let filter through? One thing I can say is I've never allowed another person's opinion to shift my decision. I always ultimately come back to, and I think that that kind of brings it full circle to your question, like, what are we learning, but why are values so important? It helps me to know I'm on the right path. If I can learn what to filter things through, if we listen to what's going on internally in our bodies, if we listen to our thoughts, if we can kind of hear what really, like people talk about like setting your soul on fire, like what actually lights you up, then I think you're living a truly fulfilling life as opposed to just being here.
Yeah. We've talked about it, but I've heard it before. And it's something I'm even reading right now because me and you were talking about this book that I'm reading right now. And who knows, I may do a whole solo episode on this once I get through it. But it's called 10X is Easier Than 2X. And it's by Dan Sullivan and with Dr. Benjamin Hardy. And Benjamin Hardy is actually the one that's writing a lot of this. And he's had interviewed Dan Sullivan, who's been like a strategic coach for like, I don't know, tons of time, all the time. Like he's like pretty much coached these like very high level entrepreneurs through different things. And this book is not for everybody, but one of the things that it comes back to is really how to do what you just said. How do you learn to tune out some of the noise around you? It doesn't mean that you don't listen to feedback. It doesn't mean that you don't seek feedback. It doesn't mean that you don't care about what other people think at the end of the day.
Right.
But it does mean that ultimately you get so clear on what's most important to you and you tune it all else out. Like you just keep on going straight ahead. And I think this is hard because I am very similar. I think me and you have a lot of similarities.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my things is I am in constant people pleasing, like recovery mode. Because I was raised to really be considerate. And it doesn't mean that I'm not considerate of other people's feelings and thoughts and wants and needs. Sure. But I was raised to be so considerate of it that I would put what I wanted on the back burner. So, for example, if somebody needed to leave a meeting at a certain time, I'm just going to use this as an example because it happened recently. I was in a meeting. This person had to go somewhere at the end of the meeting. And it wasn't a meeting that I was facilitating. I was just a part of it. And, you know, at the time that they needed to leave, they got up. They said, hey, guys, I have to go. I have to go honor this other commitment I have over here. Y'all have a great rest of the day. And this is crazy. But I remember just being a like observer to that. And I'm like, wow, so that's how you do that. Because I would maybe sit past me and maybe even present me in some situations would sit way longer in a meeting.
And squirm in your seat.
And squirm in my seat. Yes, to not be rude. To leave, you know, and in the meeting time, actually, I didn't realize what time the meeting, but the meeting would already supposed to been ended. So, you know, it was past that person's time. So I just observed this and I'm like, yes, I want to get clearer about that. I want to be somebody who says like, you know what, I want to honor and respect your time, that I want to honor and respect your values, but ultimately I want to make decisions that are aligned with what my values are, with what I feel is my purpose and meaning. Because ultimately, if we're letting everybody else's priorities come in, at some point, the thing that we are supposed to do, like you said, that uniqueness, that purpose, that meaning, the thing that I feel very strongly that I'm called to do is not going to get done because other people's priorities are going to dictate my present and ultimately my future. And so I've just been thinking about a lot about this lately, because I think that sometimes people can say, well, if you're not doing what everybody else wants you to do, then are you considering other people? Well, what would you say to that?
Well, the first thing that comes up for me as far as a lesson learned is I'm so clear now that the motivation that drives me in a similar situation to what you just described to continue to sit there and not get up if the meeting's over, you have somewhere else to be, you're not getting anything out of it anymore, whatever the case may be, is for me, it's rooted in that not wanting to get in trouble, not wanting to do anything wrong, not wanting to upset someone, maybe avoiding some type of confrontation or discomfort.
Or maybe even rejection of like, oh my gosh, what did they just do?
Yeah. So I think the piece for me is really you have to know yourself. Because you and I are such extremes, we're never going to get to a point where we are completely inconsiderate of other humans. It's just not possible for us.
We're helpers by trade. So like we like live and breathe. Let me help somebody in need.
Yeah. So that's not going to go away. I think it's more that is not necessarily what leads me anymore. There's going to be that level of consideration. But then before I act, before I say yes, before I offer something, my time, money, energy, that there's going to be that secondary, okay, but let me check in with myself. And it does lead to a happier life. We think in the moment that it's going to lead to strife and discomfort. That's brief. As time goes on, it gets easier. And the people that stay around you and that are really there rooting for you and love you and support you, know you. And you don't have to justify yourself to them. They know you're a considerate person and they want you to do you.
That's so true. Well, and you know what? Like I said, this book that I'm reading, one of the things they talk about is if there's something clearly that you know the reason why you're going for it, that it doesn't require justification. So I love
your permission.
I love our permission. I love how you just say justification, because it's crazy. The further you get down a road where you are like, okay, I can see so clearly where I feel like I'm supposed to be called to go, then sometimes you can find yourself justifying why you want certain things or why you want certain things to be a certain way, you know? And I loved how they said something in the book, because they said this will be particularly vexing to the self-righteous needers among us. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard because we can be guilted sometimes into doing what other people believe we should do. But really, to live a life, like you said, that you're uniquely positioned to live, that you're uniquely, like, you have to kind of get past that discomfort of the approval, the needing to have a justify, something that like makes sense to everybody else. Like, because it's not going to make sense to everybody else, some of the things that you're wanting to do. But how do you get around people that know your heart and that know still your intention, that will know, hey, this doesn't make sense to me why Julia's going to do this thing, but I know that her heart and intention is good and is strong, and that there is a reason why she's headed off to the middle, you know, wherever it's going to the east over here. This is the reason why Julia's going over here.
Yeah. Well, and it was also a crash course in all of this when I started my practice. And I'm sure you have your own examples of this as well. It's impossible to have every single person on your team fully on board with every decision you make, to be thrilled with every change. It's going to happen. And I think the sooner that you lean into that and embrace it and accept it, the better. So that was what really helped me. And then I think the other piece was co-parenting, right? Like parenting my daughter with someone that I'm no longer married to, that is a very different person, different personality, different value system, you know, different style, and still respecting them. You can obviously disagree and still respect one another. So I think that's another component too, is being okay with people not sharing the same opinion, not getting it, even if you try and you explain it well, and you're in alignment, that's what you stand on. that's how you can show up or lay your head on the pillow at the end of the day and be okay with it because you're
in alignment. Yeah. Well, and like you said, it's getting past that part and then also being able to pay attention to yourself and knowing yourself. And this takes some work, folks. I'll be honest with you. I preach and I tell people, I'm like, know thyself, learn to know thyself, whether it's you need to get some journaling out, you need to like get a therapist, you need to like, get a coach. I mean, I don't know what you want to do, but like find ways to know yourself. Because you have to then start to recognize when you're uncomfortable and that you have to allow yourself to sit there if you're trying to change. So I'm thinking about like, again, not to go back to it, but like, I think because it's been a thing that I've had to learn to let go of so that I can live an aligned life. And that is that people thing, the people please thing, And there are times that I've lost sleep at night because I'm like, I just said something so dumb. And it'd be weird, the things that I'd focus on that I'd be like, oh my gosh, that person's going to not get what I was trying to say. They're going to be sad and upset. And I didn't mean it that way. I need to go. I'm like, I feel like I need to go justify myself to them. Right. And then I'd have to be aware, like, Christy, no, that's coming from this place.
Right.
It's coming from this place of fear that you don't want to have happen. But that you have to let go of that because if your intention's in the right place, you might not be perceived always in the way that you want to be perceived. But you have to let go in order to go towards this thing that you're going towards.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've had to sit in some of that discomfort before, Julia, where you're like,
yeah, well, I think a lot of it for me too is, and I keep going back to the Enneagram because that's just what relates or resonates with me, but knowing the numbers of everyone on my team and therefore their core motivations and their fears, that to me, that's the case in point. That I am coming from my place with my experiences and I'm leading with my fear and they have their own. And so that is inherently where the disconnect can come in sometimes if you can't call it out and speak to it and you don't necessarily know your audience. For me, I do. So I'm going into those conversations. If I have to address somebody on something, I know where they're coming from before I even start. So I lead with that. And then if it stirs up stuff for me, I know that's my responsibility. And if I need to bring it up to them, I can, but it's not with a, you need to own this. It's more of a, let me just kind of, you got it.
Yeah. And that's really true. I mean, I think you bring up a whole nother point that we could probably spend a long time on over here, but is that understanding piece, because I think so many times, and for those of you that may not be familiar with Enneagram, I know that we actually did this on my team too, Julia, probably like towards the end of last year. And I probably need to go back and like look at everything again, but it was so eye-opening to understand what people needed on the team, where they were coming from, how a question about XYZ change is not coming from a place of, this is what they need to feel safe, to feel secure. So I just think that understanding piece is a big thing when you're working with anybody or even in your family.
Absolutely.
Understanding, like you said, with co-parenting, understanding that we're not going to always agree, but so many times we don't often understand where people are coming from. So then we perceive things in a way that's from our lenses. I have my glasses on today. So for those, I know y'all are not going to see me on this podcast recording, but I have my glasses on. And so I always see things through my lenses, my experiences, my internal story, my personality, my Enneagram type, right? And sometimes I think it can be hard to try to understand where somebody else is coming from. But the more you understand how people operate, it sounds like for you, the smoother things have went in some ways.
Yeah. And the easier it is to not take it personally.
Ooh, yeah.
So for me, if I'm getting activated by something, I can finish that interaction. I can take a step back. I can process it. I can recognize it. And then I like parse it out. It's like the pie chart. Like how much of that is really on that person? How much of that is really on me, right?
And listen, I'm telling you, if you do not take time to learn to be aware and to be self-aware, then I don't know if you've observed this, Julia, but I've seen a lot of people going through life, and myself included, so I'm not immune to this, but where they put the responsibility on somebody else. Well, that's person. They did that hurt me. And not saying that some of that's not true, But the more you can
Mm-hmm.
understand yourself, you can understand what's more you and what do you need to take responsibility and how somebody else is ultimately not responsible for your feelings. And truly, most people are not going around being like, oh, you know what? I wonder if that thing I said to Julia today is got
Right.
her on edge.
Most people are not worrying about the same things that you're worrying about. Yeah, it's true. And I think the more aware you are and the more you go into interactions and relationships with that understanding of the other person, or even just the curiosity to learn, the better you are at communicating. Because I feel like that's our responsibility. It's like, I need to know myself enough and I need to be able to communicate what's going on for me. And then that person has a choice at that point, and they can either adjust or maybe make a shift, and or they cannot. And that piece is what is on them. But I have to communicate it well. And in order to communicate, I have to understand it. That piece is on me.
Yeah. How has curiosity helped you in pursuing the things that you had goals to achieve and the things on your heart?
Oh, invaluable. So I think any situation that you approach from a place of curiosity, you are bound to get better results because it's less critical, it's more open ended. You are coming into it not as an expert. It's like we're all the experts on ourselves. We can't be expected to know all things and have every answer. And so I think it just opens up dialogue and allows people to be them and share what they feel comfortable with. Anything goes.
Yeah. How would you recommend for people listening for them to be more curious in their life? Because I think curiosity can lead to more understanding and it can lead to more growth, collaboration, everything. But what have you found or what would you recommend can help people?
So are you tired of the Enneagram yet? So I feel like this comes down to the triads. Okay. So it's the 9 types and they're each divided into groups of 3. So knowing my triad. So I am primarily action oriented. So I'm very aware of what's going on internally for me. And I operate based off of intuition and gut. So for me, the thinking and the feeling comes later. So feeling is usually second and thinking is last. But I'm also very quick on my feet. So for me, learning that blew my mind because now I take a step back, take the time, think about it, feel the feelings, and then take action. So I'm going to sleep on it. What I would encourage people to do is be aware of what they primarily go to. Do they operate like me and base it off of their gut? Are they more the thinkers, overthinkers, or are they operating based off of feeling? And so I think tapping into the other 2 areas that might not be your strong suit and getting curious about that. So for me, meditating and journaling, that enables me to really tap into the thinking and feeling piece before I make a decision. So somebody could do that reverse.
Yeah. I think my triad's the feeling people. Isn't that what 7 is in?
I think you're thinking.
Oh, I am thinking. Woohoo.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I don't think half the time. I'm like, oh, this sounds good. No, but it is interesting because, again, knowing yourself then helps you then say, okay, how do I best support myself so that I can show up in the best version of myself in an authentic way? Because I think, like you said, we'll circle back to a beginning of our conversation. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
resonate with the value of authenticity. And I think it's so hard. It can be hard, maybe not so hard. It can be hard to learn how to be authentically yourself in a society or culture that often presents an image of how you should be, and realizing that we're all so unique and different in how we show up in this world. I mean, where we get dropped down to, like I always say, it's always
Right.
interesting. I always think of it like we got dropped down, like somehow, somewhere where we landed.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many unique things about us that will never be again. That's what's crazy. But how do you learn how to be you in a world of such different people? And that can be a challenge to learn, but the more you can show up more authentically, the more you give others permission to be themselves.
Yeah. I think that's why finding your people is so important. It's like, who are the people that light you up? Who are the people that support you? Who are the people that are honest with you and that have withstood the test of time, seen you at different phases, your best, your worst? That can be really helpful.
Yeah. And this is hard, but also I think, like you said, finding your people and then learning how to recognize who's not your people. And then that's okay.
Mhm. But when you have those people, I feel like that's your soft
Hmm.
place to land. If you've got your person or your core group of people, and hopefully that's family or, a good friend or your partner, then you can dip your toe in and explore with them and then share it with the rest of the world.
Then share it with the rest of the world. I love that. And folks, I don't know if y'all know, but there's like legitimately a lot of billion people living. And do you know the population number, Julia? I don't know. It's just a lot of people. And I always forget this because I live in a small area. And
Mhm.
every time I travel, I always remember like, Christy,
Big world out there.
there's a big world. And everybody's walking around in their own head and their own experience. Like, get out of yours. That's my motivation to myself. So,
For sure.
well, Julia, if you were to go back to younger you, or maybe you first venturing out on this goal that you had, and you were to give yourself a piece of advice, what is one thing that you'd be like, Julia, don't forget this?
Recognize your accomplishments, keep a list, put things in a box. If you get thank you cards, if you get recognition, an award, we can be so self critical and our brains are hardwired to focus on the negative things for self preservation. So take stock and inventory of the things you do well, not in a conceited way, but even if you're just silently acknowledging it or able to share it with your people, don't overlook that stuff because it's so important. It can help rewire your brain and keep you moving forward when you might have those people that you have upset or you're in those situations where you're feeling uncomfortable. That can help give you some solid footing.
Yeah, man, that's so good. And I have a thought. I'm going to give you a really good quote that I just recently found as we wrap up this episode, but you're going to have to stay to the end to listen to it. So don't push the pause button yet. Okay, but Julia, okay, I know you do consulting. I know you have a podcast. Maybe you can tell everybody a little bit about that if they want to be able to find you and find out more about you.
Yeah. So Compassionate Consulting Company is that business. And I help clinicians, but really entrepreneurs start their businesses, expand and build a team, and diversify. Find other things that they can do that utilize their skill set to really broaden the horizons and keep things exciting and fresh. And the Enneagram, I offer a training on the Enneagram for teams. If anybody's interested, head over to compassionateconsultingcompany.com. It's been invaluable for my group.
Yeah, awesome. And y'all check that out. I mean, if you've never actually did that with your group and you don't understand and you're like, you know what? And because you may have never heard of this before, and that's okay. I will say that it is a game changer in teams, especially if you want your team to work more cohesively together and more collaboratively. They can have a really increased awareness in themselves and understanding of themselves and also understanding of the people that are on their team. And so y'all definitely check that out. So, well, Julia, thank you so much. I know it's taken us a year to get here, but I just want to appreciate and acknowledge you for like continuing to show up consistently, continuing to go towards that clear goal that you had for yourself and for your team. And then also how you're continuing to expand that. And also just helping people remember to be compassionate, not only with themselves, right? But with others around them, because I know that's at the core of who you are and what you do. So I appreciate you coming on and being a guest today.
Thank you so much for making this happen and for all you do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a thing that I just saw yesterday that I'm going to end the show with today. Julia made me think of this whenever she said one of her pieces of advice to herself is just to continue to be able to be more celebratory of the milestones, the accomplishments, recognize the things that people are giving into you, whether it be a card. And this quote stood out to me so much that I did one of those things that I kind of do when I get on Facebook. I saved the photo. And so I'm going to share it with y'all as the ending to this episode today. It's something by Topher Kirby, who I don't know, he just showed up on my feed. I guess they knew I liked the motivational quotes. And so here's this for y'all that he wrote. We don't always notice when our dreams become reality because there is rarely a parade or celebration. Life just keeps moving. So let's take a moment today to look around and appreciate the journey. We may be exactly where we want to be, or there still might be a long way to go. Both of those truths should be acknowledged and appreciated. Until next time. That's all for today on Inspiring Possible. If you found a little inspiration today, please go on over to iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you tune in to listen to leave us a comment and rate us. Also, make sure and link up with me at inspiringpossible.com to get the free Dream It, Write It, Do It workbook. And don't forget to follow us on social media and share this with anyone who needs to be inspired. Remember, if you can believe it, it's possible.